Hello aspirants, welcome back to the channel. Today's discussion will be on biodiversity, levels of biodiversity measurement, speciation, what's the meaning of it, ecosystem services by biodiversity, causes of the biodiversity loss and modes of the conservation methods. So the first of all thing is that biodiversity is nothing but every organism in this ecosystem is very unique. Differences or variations among these living organisms that occur in differences and variations in the diversity like a number, variety or variability of the living organisms is known as the diversity, biodiversity, which means that there are more species. Among the species also there is a variety in the ecosystem that is termed as biological diversity, which was given by the scientist Thomas Lovejoy, who is tend to be called as the godfather of biodiversity in 1980, and the word is coined by the E.O. Wilson in 1988. So, the discussion of biodiversity by as a definition by the United Nations Earth Summit 1992 says that there is a variability of the living organisms of all the sources on terrestrial, marine and other ecosystems. That complexity in diversity of species is known as the biodiversity. What are the different levels of biodiversity? The first one is the genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is a variability among the individual number of genes of the genetic information of the plants and animals as well as the microorganisms. The amount of variation that is observed among the individuals as well as the complexity of the habitats where the organisms will adapt and evolve in the environmental changes, getting up into the pressure of the natural selection. Thus the environmental has a limits to the size of population, like these rabbits, group of rabbits, that is a genetic variety, like there are 6 to 7 rabbits at the place. So Indian diversity in terms of genetic diversity is huge enough because it's a biodiversity hotspot as well as lots of endemic species are originating in India. Then the next level of type of biodiversity is the species diversity, which will refer to the variety and the number of different species in a given time and in a given area. That is only called as a species evenness and species richness. Species richness is that definition of number of species in an area of a community that will determine the primary estimation of the species in a particular area. In that also you have three different kinds of levels of biodiversity, just like that, just like in the levels of biodiversity, levels of genetic biodiversity, same way species diversity has three levels. Like one is the alpha diversity. In a local area, if you are understanding like how many different varieties of species are existing, that is expressed in terms of alpha diversity. Beta diversity is the number of species unique between community, like in a region how many number different types of species will occur. When it comes to the uh, gamma diversity, it refers to the diversity of species on a larger area, like total gangetic belt if you're taking, then that is the gamma diversity. If you're taking a small area of your own habitat region, then that is beta. Alpha is simply the number of the species. Then next discussion would be on the patterns of biodiversity, where patterns is nothing but the diversity of plants and animals are not just uniform throughout the world. They show some kind of an uneven distribution, because of which there is an interesting pattern of diversity that occurs in latitudinally. One is such latitudinal gradients, where you can see when you go, as you go from the equator to the till the tropics, and then from the tropics to the pole level, you will feel the species richness will reduce because the habitations in the tropics and then to the polar level is reducing. That will not have an adaptation. Then comes the elevation gradients. As you go over in the above altitudes of a mountainous region, you will find that the variability of temperature and water will limit the kind of species are available in that elevation. Species variation versus time depends the function of time, not like just like the temperate regions or any kind of a biome that we are going to discuss, but speciation with time refers to the versus time refers to the kind of pattern of diversity that is existing as a function of time, which is not disturbed for millions of years, thus having a long evolutionary time for a species to diversify in its original habitat. The last one, the pattern of biodiversity, is the photosynthetically active radiation, where the more the solar energy that is available in tropics, that will contribute to the highest productivity, determines a kind of a pattern in a biodiversity region. And how do we measure biodiversity? biodiversity. The species diversity, like the number of species, the variety and richness in an area, is depending upon the richness and the variety, which is the meaning of species richness, the number of species in a particular community. That is species richness, right? So the general trends in the increase with the increase in area from higher to lower latitudes and lower to higher latitudes, there is a variation in kind of number of species, that is known as species richness, by which we measure the by which the measurement of biodiversity is made. Then there is another concept of speciation, which says that with the evolution process itself, the formation of new and distinct species are reproductively isolated from each other. The speciation is nothing but you draw a line between two or different species, that is known as a speciation. Like you differentiate the homo sapiens, you differentiate the feline cats and leopards, another category. So this is a line, the splitting event of differentiating that produces two or more separate species is known as speciation process. In the speciation we have different kinds of varieties of speciation, like allopatric, peripatric, parapatric, sympatric speciation, which is not of the concern for this ecology and environment. So we'll continue the lecture with next important aspect of what is the importance of biodiversity. See, the biodiversity benefits people by its contribution to human welfare, luxury and livelihoods through security, resilience and social relations with health and freedom of choices or actions for future generations. Biodiversity gives us a lot of ecosystem services that are referring to different kinds of conditions that help and sustain the human life in form of materials, food, fuels and fibers, regulating the temperature, supporting the processes of water purification and opportunities for kind of a recreation or a tourism purposes. Biodiversity is also important because there is a lot of direct and indirect use. In terms of direct use, you can have some consumptive uses like food, some medicinal value, industrial, ecotourism value. And in terms of indirect value, you can see that the biodiversity functions in a very nature of benefiting the ecological functions through preventing the soil erosion, having the regulation of nutrient cycle, regulating the climate, decomposition of waste, air, water purification. It does not involve any kind of a destruction to the natural resource. Thus, the importance of biodiversity increases. But what causes this biodiversity loss is what is the concern important thing here, because loss of biodiversity is damaged. The habitat destruction is damaged because of the natural as well as the man-made factors. What are the natural factors? Floods, earthquakes, landslides, lack of pollination and diseases that causes the deep species to deteriorate. And on the other hand, man-made causes like habitat destruction, uncontrolled commercial exploitation, then extension of the agriculture practices, pollutions, filling up of wetlands and destruction of coastal areas are some of the man-made causes which are causing a threat to the biodiversity. This slide has been taken from a report of a recent IUCN report which says that biodiversity is under threat because 85% of overexploitation of species of fish species is occurring. 50% of earth is already wetlands have been destroyed, and there is a loss of $1.4 trillion of economy due to the invasive species that are occurring at a higher rate. When the invasive species mode of migration is more, because the human and animal conflict is increasing, the human's habitat is expanding, thus decreasing the biodiversity level. So this acts as a right amount of factual knowledge regarding what are the threats to the biodiversity. Concerning this causes and consequences are interrelated with a very good chart here. That is why I thought I should just add it to the PPT session so that you can understand it. What happens is, in the biodiversity loss, by over harvesting, pollution and habitat alteration, we are causing some kind of degradation to the ecosystem services, loss of ecosystem services, economy, health and social disruption is also occurring. So the causes and consequences have been represented here in this diagram in the biodiversity. So that is why, understanding these threats, we have understood that biodiversity has to be conserved. But how do we conserve biodiversity? Either you go for some kind of an in situ at the location point of protections or towards the biodiversity conservation, or some kind of ex situ measures. Now see, what do you mean by in situ? In situ conservation is a on-site conservation methods where you conserve the habitat at its original place. It is the best method for protecting any kind of a species, and their habitat and their ecological processes are stayed intact in that place only. The objective of this is to protect and restore the natural system that is existing in, and the advantage of such kind of a in situ kind of a protection based biodiversity conservation method is to identify the unknown and unidentified species along with the well recognized ones. Whereas on the other hand, if you see the ex situ kind of a conservation methods, you conserve the biodiversity outside their natural habitats, just like the seed bank, a botanical garden, zoological park, and aquarium, where you are captivating them under human care because they are threatened. That is why you say that you keep them under captivity. You will have them, you will create such kind of a natural, you will try to recreate their natural habitats and try to feed on them in zoos, botanical gardens, nurseries, and etc. kind of a conservation methods. So after studying in situ and ex situ, we'll just come under some of the methods of ex situ, because in situ will anyway study in the protected areas chapter, which is coming on the next unit itself. Before that, let's complete the ex situ conservation methods. Like one of it is genes bank. Gene banks is nothing but, let's see the example here with the diagram which I've given you. The gene banks are the germplasm is a collection of genetic resources of an organism, just like the DNA of your own body. The same thing, the genes of an organism can be preserved in the bottles and located in a storage factory, which will help us in studying the biodiversity concept in a very excellent manner. It will act as a blueprint and process the cryopreservation restores long-term viability of the genes. So that is a gene bank. Next concept is the captive breeding. If you see the captive breeding diagram here, the panda, small panda, little panda is kept under a cage in under human monitoring. We are going to have a controlled environment, breed the rare and endangered animals in a restricted settings. Breeding is done so that with proper human vigilance, a new population of desired species can be created under laboratory conditions, and this forms one form of an ex situ kind of a conservation method. Now come the botanical gardens. Botanical gardens are nothing but the collection of more number of herbaceous, woody, and for plants of for which are responsible, which are important for our research, study, and education purposes. So that are the locations. Those are the locations where botanical gardens are placed. Then comes a zoo. Zoos are the areas where important establishments of ex situ conservation methods, where you come along with different kinds of species of animals at a one restricted location, that is also useful for ecotourism or entertainment purposes, that will help the individuals to understand the different kinds of animal patterns, and a kind of a human interface can be created, like what kind of animals exist and how do they have a habitat, and all these recreation purposes establishment is done with zoo establishment. And Central Zoo Authority of India is the nodal agency that looks after the permission to be granted for establishing any zoological park. So other areas of conservation methods are protected areas, in which national park comes in, world heritage sites, and then some kind of game reserves, Ramsar sites, biosphere reserves, and eco-sensitive areas. So in that kind of a discussion, where other kinds of areas of conservation methods are there, which we'll anyway cover in the next session. Before that, eco-sensitive areas, in that eco-sensitive areas is what I am going to discuss here in this session. Eco-sensitive areas are nothing but very ecologically and economically important. They are very sensitive, thus they have lots of biological and ecological importance, largely irreplaceable. That is why they can be destroyed easily. That is why we need to have a look or a monitor or regulation under them, maintain the ecological stability of the area, and conserve the biological diversity in that area. So a 10-kilometer line is drawn around any of the ecological sensitive area, and there a sensitive corridor is established. No kinds of resorts or no kinds of construction or no kinds of illegal activities are allowed in that area. So a very best conservation method is through eco-sensitive zones. Some of the eco-sensitive zones where under Project Tiger they have been declared, like these green portions which have been mentioned in the map of the India. There, understanding the importance of how tiger is being poached, that is why these areas have been declared as the eco-sensitive zones. And what kind of activities are allowed in ESZ, which is eco-sensitive zones? One is a prohibited activity, regulated activities, and permitted. Permitted are those which are going to even better the ecosystem, like agriculture and horticulture practices, rainwater harvesting, some organic farming, some green technologies. If you're using those, activities are permitted. But regulated activities are any kind of deforestation, hotels or resorts kind of a construction, agriculture system, or any kind of heavy technology if you're using, then those are regulated under the purview of the government. you have to carry on these activities. And prohibited are the major establishments of trading, illegal poaching, causing any kind of pollution, hydroelectric power plants. All these activities are prohibited. What is the significance? Significance is because it acts as a transition zone between the areas of protection and the lesser areas of protection. It will minimize the impact of human interference with the biotic resources, and it will also minimize the depletion of forest resources, and man animal conflict will be reduced. So in the next session we'll continue this session itself, the biodiversity portion, where the IUCN releases some kind of a red books and regarding these threatened or some extinct and wild, what is the category and what kind of animals do come under that, everything will be dealt. And especially the focus of next session would be on biodiversity of India and biodiversity hotspots in India. What are those portions and why are these called biodiversity hotspots, and what is the criteria to describe or declare an area as biodiversity hotspot, and some of the miscellaneous terms which will frequently occur in the environment portion and we often get confused with that we shall discuss in the next session. Before I end this session, please do go through the personal guidance program by Arora sir, who will give you a lot of guidance material support and as well as the mental support, a motivation kind of a mentor who will give you lots of strategy as well as individual based timetable that will enhance your preparation more, be it a beginner or any kind of a level of preparation you're stuck up at. He will help you find a direction to your preparation. So do contact on the below mentioned details for the next until the next session. Take care.